It was a quiet evening in the small suburban town of Silver Ridge, where life usually moved at a slow and predictable pace. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple. The streets were calm, and neighbors exchanged polite waves as they returned home from work or ran errands. It seemed like any other ordinary night until everything changed. Captain Robert Anderson, a decorated senior naval officer with over 20 years of service to his name, was driving home after a long day at the base. He had spent hours reviewing training protocols for new recruits, and all he wanted now was to relax in the comfort of his own home. Dressed in casual clothes, a plain t-shirt and jeans, he looked like any other civilian on the road. His car, an old but well-maintained sedan, blended seamlessly into the flow of traffic. As he approached a quiet intersection near his neighborhood, red and blue flashing lights suddenly appeared in his rearview mirror. At first, Robert felt no alarm. Traffic stops were common enough, and he hadn't been speeding or breaking any rules that he could recall. Still, he signaled and pulled over smoothly onto the shoulder, turning off the engine as protocol dictated. He rolled down his window slightly, resting his hands on the steering wheel where they would be visible, an instinct drilled into him by years of discipline in the military. What happened next would leave Robert shaken to his core and ignite outrage across the entire community. Officer Mark Harris stepped out of his patrol car, his posture stiff and his expression stern. Harris was a familiar face around Silver Ridge, though not necessarily a beloved one. Over the years, whispers about his aggressive demeanor and questionable conduct had circulated among residents. Some claimed he targeted people based on their appearance, while others accused him of using excessive force during routine interactions. Despite these murmurs, nothing substantial had ever stuck against him, allowing him to continue patrolling the streets unchecked. Harris walked up to Robert's car with deliberate slowness, his boots clicking against the pavement. Instead of starting with the standard greeting, "Good evening, sir, do you know why I stopped you?" he launched straight into accusations. "License and registration," he barked, his voice sharp and commanding. There was no politeness, no attempt to explain the reason for the stop. Just an order delivered with unmistakable hostility. Robert blinked, taken aback by the tone but determined to remain calm. "Of course, officer," he replied evenly, reaching carefully into his glove compartment for the requested documents. As he handed them over, he tried to clarify the situation. "I wasn't speeding, so I'm not sure what this is about." But Harris didn't seem interested in explanations. He glanced briefly at the papers before tossing them onto the dashboard of Robert's car. Then came the moment that turned the encounter from tense to terrifying. Without warning, Harris reached into his pocket, pulled out a pack of cigarettes, and lit one. The casualness of the gesture was jarring. It made it clear that he saw this interaction as trivial, even though it was anything but for Robert. 2. Smoke curled lazily into the air as Harris leaned casually against the open car door. For a split second, Robert thought maybe the worst was over. Perhaps this was just another example of a rude cop having a bad day. But then, something unthinkable happened. With no provocation, Harris suddenly drew his gun. Not subtly, not cautiously, but with dramatic flair, as if trying to intimidate. He pointed the weapon directly at Robert's head, his finger dangerously close to the trigger. "Don't move," Harris growled, his eyes narrowing. Time seemed to freeze. Robert's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing loudly in his ears. He couldn't believe what was happening. Here he was, a respected naval officer who had devoted decades of his life to protecting his country, and he was being treated like a dangerous criminal. Worse still, there was no logical reason for this escalation. For a few agonizing moments, Robert sat motionless, his mind racing. Should he say something? Try to reason with Harris? Or stay silent and hope someone intervened before things spiraled further out of control? Every fiber of his being screamed that this was wrong, yet he knew better than to react impulsively. Years of training kicked in, reminding him that staying composed was crucial in such situations. The absurdity of the moment wasn't lost on Robert. Just hours earlier, he had been leading a team of sailors, discussing strategies and offering guidance. Now, here he was, staring down the barrel of a gun wielded by a man whose authority seemed rooted more in arrogance than justice. Thankfully, fate intervened when another police car arrived on the scene. A younger officer, visibly startled by the sight of Harris pointing a weapon at an unarmed civilian, quickly stepped in to defuse the situation. "Mark, what's going on here?" the newcomer asked, his voice tinged with confusion and concern. Harris hesitated, lowering his gun reluctantly. "This guy, I don't trust him," he muttered, unable to provide a coherent explanation for his actions. By the time the ordeal ended, Robert was physically unharmed, but emotionally drained. As he drove away, he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted, not just for him personally, but for the community as a whole. Word of the incident spread rapidly. Witnesses who had seen parts of the confrontation began sharing their accounts online. Someone captured video footage of Harris lighting his cigarette and brandishing his weapon, uploading it to social media. Within hours, the clip went viral, sparking outrage far beyond the borders of Silver Ridge. People watched in disbelief as the video revealed the stark contrast between Harris's cavalier attitude and the gravity of his actions. How could a trained law enforcement officer behave so recklessly? And why had he singled out a decorated naval officer? As the story gained traction, questions began to surface about Harris's motivations. Was this simply a case of poor judgment, or was there something deeper at play? Many viewers pointed out subtle details in the video, like the way Harris sneered as he spoke to Robert, or the dismissive wave of his hand when Robert attempted to explain himself. These observations fueled suspicions of bias and prejudice, adding fuel to the growing firestorm of public anger. For Robert, the aftermath was surreal. Friends and colleagues reached out to express support, while strangers sent messages praising his composure under pressure. Yet beneath the surface, he grappled with lingering feelings of fear and frustration. He couldn't help but wonder how many others had faced similar treatment, and whether their stories had gone untold because they lacked the platform or privilege to speak up. The incident became a rallying cry for those advocating for accountability within law enforcement. It also served as a sobering reminder of the challenges faced by marginalized communities every day. As the days passed, one thing became abundantly clear. This wasn't just Robert's story anymore. It belonged to everyone who believed in fairness, equality, and justice. And so the stage was set for a battle that would test the resolve of an entire town, and perhaps inspire change far beyond its limits. The video of Officer Mark Harris pointing his gun at Captain Robert Anderson spread like wildfire across the internet. By morning, it had been viewed millions of times, shared on every major social media platform, and discussed in newsrooms around the country. What started as a local incident quickly became a national conversation about racism, police misconduct, and the abuse of power. For many people, the footage was shocking, but for others, especially those from marginalized communities, it felt painfully familiar. As more details emerged, the public began piecing together the larger picture behind Harris's actions. Witnesses who had seen the confrontation firsthand came forward with their accounts, each one painting a clearer image of what had transpired that night. One neighbor, Sarah Thompson, described hearing Harris shout racial slurs during the traffic stop. "I live just down the street," she said in an interview. "I heard him call Captain Anderson something awful. Words I won't repeat. It made my blood boil." Sarah's testimony added fuel to the growing outrage. People couldn't ignore the possibility that Harris's behavior wasn't just reckless, but rooted in deep-seated prejudice. The fact that Robert, a senior naval officer with an impeccable record, was targeted so aggressively raised serious questions about how often such incidents occurred under the radar. Local activists wasted no time seizing the moment. Organizations dedicated to racial justice and police reform sprang into action, organizing rallies and demanding accountability. Protest signs began appearing across Silver Ridge, bearing slogans like "Justice for Captain Anderson" and "End Police Brutality Now." Citizens gathered outside the police station, chanting slogans and calling for Harris's immediate dismissal. One particularly vocal group was led by Marcus Johnson, a community organizer who had long fought against systemic racism in law enforcement. Standing before a crowd of hundreds, Marcus addressed the protesters with passion. "This isn't just about one bad cop," he declared. "It's about a system that allows officers like Harris to act with impunity. We've seen this pattern over and over again. Officers abusing their power, targeting black and brown individuals, and facing no real consequences. Enough is enough." Marcus's words resonated deeply with the audience. Many nodded in agreement, some wiping away tears as they thought about loved ones who had endured similar injustices. Among them was Robert's wife, Michelle, who stood quietly at the edge of the crowd. She clutched her children close, her face etched with both pride and pain. Though she admired her husband's courage in speaking out, she couldn't help but worry about the toll this ordeal might take on their family. Meanwhile, journalists dug deeper into Harris's background, uncovering a troubling history of misconduct complaints. Records showed that he had faced multiple accusations of racial profiling, verbal harassment, and excessive force throughout his career. In one instance, a Latina mother claimed Harris had pulled her over without cause and mocked her accent during the encounter. Another complaint came from a young black man who alleged Harris had slammed him against his car door during a routine ID check. Despite these allegations, Harris had never faced significant repercussions. Internal investigations either dismissed the claims or handed down minor penalties, such as written warnings or brief suspensions. Critics argued that this leniency only emboldened him, creating a culture of fear and mistrust within the community. After revelation of Harris's past sparked further indignation. Residents demanded answers from the police department, questioning why someone with such a problematic track record had been allowed to remain on the force. Some pointed fingers at the department's leadership, accusing them of turning a blind eye to Harris's behavior. Others called for sweeping reforms, including independent oversight boards to review cases of alleged misconduct. Amid the chaos, Captain Robert Anderson found himself thrust into the spotlight. Friends urged him to stay silent, fearing retaliation or backlash. But Robert refused to let fear dictate his choices. He knew this wasn't just about him. It was about standing up for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin. In interviews, Robert spoke candidly about the trauma of that night. "I've served this country for over 20 years, he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I've risked my life to protect our freedoms. But when I look back at that moment, I realize I wasn't being treated as a hero. I was being treated as a threat. And why? Because I'm black." His words struck a chord with countless Americans, particularly those who had experienced similar discrimination. Veterans organizations rallied behind him, issuing statements condemning Harris's actions and calling for justice. Military leaders expressed solidarity, emphasizing that no service member should ever be subjected to such treatment. Even politicians weighed in, promising thorough investigations and vowing to hold Harris accountable. Yet not everyone supported Robert. A small but vocal minority defended Harris, claiming he was simply doing his job. Some argued that the video didn't tell the full story, suggesting there might have been extenuating circumstances that justified Harris's actions. Others accused Robert of exaggerating the situation for attention, though these claims were quickly discredited by the overwhelming evidence against Harris. Within the police department, opinions were divided. While some officers privately admitted that Harris had always been difficult to work with, others initially tried to shield him from criticism. They claimed he was a good cop who had made a mistake, urging the public to give him the benefit of the doubt. However, as more damning information surfaced, even his staunchest defenders began distancing themselves from him. The pressure mounted as protests intensified and calls for Harris's termination grew louder. Local officials scrambled to respond, issuing statements condemning the incident while promising transparency. The police chief announced that Harris would be placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. However, many residents saw this as too little, too late. They demanded concrete action, not empty promises. For Robert, the experience was both empowering and exhausting. On one hand, he was grateful for the outpouring of support from strangers and allies alike. On the other hand, reliving the trauma of that night took its toll. He struggled to sleep, haunted by memories of Harris's menacing glare and the cold barrel of the gun pointed at his head. Yet through it all, he remained resolute. He understood that his fight wasn't just about seeking justice for himself, it was about sparking change. He began collaborating with activists and advocacy groups, brainstorming ways to address systemic issues within law enforcement. Together, they drafted proposals for policy reforms, including mandatory body cameras for all officers, stricter accountability measures, and comprehensive training programs to combat implicit bias. As the days turned into weeks, the momentum continued to build. The incident had ignited a firestorm of activism, bringing people together from all walks of life. Families held candlelight vigils in honor of victims of police brutality. Students organized walkouts to demand safer communities. Artists created murals celebrating resilience and unity. Everywhere you looked, there was a sense of hope mixed with determination, a belief that this tragedy could serve as a catalyst for meaningful progress. But despite the progress, challenges remained. Critics argued that true reform required more than symbolic gestures. It demanded structural changes that addressed the root causes of inequality and injustice. Others warned that dismantling entrenched systems of oppression would be a long and difficult journey, one that required patience, persistence, and unwavering commitment. Through it all, Robert remained a beacon of strength and inspiration. Though he never imagined becoming the face of a movement, he embraced the role with grace and humility. Speaking at a rally weeks later, he reminded the crowd that the fight was far from over. "We can't undo the pain caused by racism and injustice," he said, his voice ringing out across the sea of supporters. "But we can build a future where everyone feels safe and valued. That's the legacy I want to leave behind." As the sun set on the gathering, cheers erupted once again. Robert's story had become more than just a tale of survival. It was a testament to the power of courage, resilience, and collective action. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. The people of Silver Ridge and beyond were ready to walk it together. In the days following the incident, Captain Robert Anderson found himself at a crossroads. The video of Officer Mark Harris pointing a gun at him had gone viral, sparking outrage and debate across the nation. While many rallied behind him, others dismissed his experience as an isolated case or even blamed him for provoking the situation. For Robert, staying silent was no longer an option. He realized that speaking out wasn't just about seeking justice for himself. It was about amplifying the voices of countless others who had suffered in silence. Robert decided to share his story publicly, stepping into the spotlight despite the risks. His first major interview aired on a popular morning news program, drawing millions of viewers eager to hear his perspective. Dressed in his crisp naval uniform, a symbol of honor and service, Robert sat calmly in front of the camera, his expression serious but composed. When asked how he felt during the confrontation with Harris, he didn't mince words. "I've dedicated my life to protecting this country," Robert began, his deep voice steady. "But when I pulled over that night, I wasn't treated like someone who served my nation. I was treated like a criminal because of the color of my skin. It's hard to describe what it feels like to have a gun pointed at your head by someone whose job is supposed to be keeping you safe." The raw honesty of his words struck a chord with viewers. Many were moved to tears, while others felt anger, bubbling inside them, not just for Robert but for every person who had ever faced similar treatment. Social media lit up with messages of support, hashtags like "Stand with Captain Anderson" trending worldwide. People shared stories of their own encounters with police misconduct, flooding comment sections with testimonies that painted a grim picture of systemic racism. Robert didn't stop at one interview. Over the next few weeks, he appeared on talk shows, podcasts, and news panels, using each platform to shed light on the broader issue of racial profiling and police brutality. He spoke not only as a victim but also as an advocate for change. In one particularly powerful moment during a televised town hall, he addressed a crowd filled with activists, law enforcement officials, and concerned citizens. "This isn't about me," he said firmly, looking directly into the camera. "It's about the countless men, women, and children who are targeted every day because of their race. It's about the fear parents feel when they send their kids out into the world, knowing they might not come home because of someone else's prejudice. We can't keep pretending this problem doesn't exist." His speeches resonated deeply with marginalized communities, especially those who had long felt ignored by mainstream society. Veterans groups rallied around him, organizing marches and petitions demanding accountability for Harris and reforms within law enforcement. Military leaders issued statements condemning Harris's actions, emphasizing that no service member should face such disrespect. Even politicians joined the chorus, promising investigations and legislative action to address systemic issues. But speaking out came with its challenges. As Robert gained visibility, so did the backlash. Some critics accused him of exaggerating the incident or using it to gain fame. Others questioned why he hadn't resisted or fought back against Harris, implying that his calm demeanor somehow validated the officer's behavior. Trolls flooded his social media accounts with hateful comments, calling him names and dismissing his claims as lies. Despite the negativity, Robert refused to let detractors silence him. He leaned on his family and close friends for support, finding strength in their unwavering belief in his mission. His wife, Michelle, became a pillar of encouragement, reminding him of the importance of his message. "You're doing this for more than just yourself," she told him one evening after a particularly grueling day of interviews. "You're giving a voice to people who don't have one." Empowered by her words, Robert continued pushing forward. He collaborated with civil rights organizations to draft proposals aimed at reforming policing practices. These included measures like mandatory body cameras for all officers, independent oversight committees to investigate complaints, and rigorous training programs to address implicit bias. He met with lawmakers, urging them to prioritize these changes and hold officers accountable for misconduct. One of the most impactful moments came when Robert addressed a large protest rally in downtown Silver Ridge. Thousands of people had gathered, holding signs and chanting slogans as they marched through the streets. When Robert took the stage, the crowd fell silent, hanging on his every word. "I never wanted to be here," he admitted, his voice tinged with emotion. "I never imagined I'd be standing before you, talking about something so painful. But if sharing my story can help prevent another family from going through what mine has endured, then it's worth it." He went on to recount the details of the traffic stop, describing the fear and humiliation he felt as Harris pointed a gun at him. "Imagine being in my shoes," he said. "Imagine working hard your whole life, serving your country only to be treated like a threat because of the way you look. That's not freedom. That's not justice." The audience erupted in applause, cheering loudly as Robert concluded his speech. Many wiped away tears, moved by his vulnerability and determination. Among the attendees was Sarah Thompson, the neighbor who had witnessed part of the incident. She approached Robert afterward, thanking him for speaking out. "Your courage gives us hope," she said, shaking his hand. "We won't let this go unnoticed." As the protest gained momentum, pressure mounted on local authorities to take action. Protesters demanded Harris's immediate termination, along with sweeping reforms to address systemic racism within the police department. They organized boycotts of businesses that supported the status quo and staged sit-ins outside government buildings. The movement spread beyond Silver Ridge, inspiring similar demonstrations in cities across the country. For Robert, the growing support reinforced his belief that change was possible. He knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he also understood the power of collective action. Each march, each petition, each conversation brought them one step closer to a fairer and more equitable society. Yet, even as the movement gained traction, Robert couldn't ignore the toll it took on his personal life. The constant media appearances and public speaking engagements left him physically and emotionally drained. Flashbacks of the traffic stop haunted him, making it difficult to sleep at night. Sometimes he wondered if he was doing enough, if his efforts would truly make a difference. But then he remembered the faces of the people he had met along the way. The young boy clutching a sign that read, "Black Lives Matter," the elderly woman tearfully thanking him for fighting for her grandchildren, the fellow veterans who saluted him as he passed by. Their hope and resilience reminded him why he had chosen to speak out in the first place. Change starts with courage, Robert often told himself. And sometimes courage means standing up, even when you're scared. By the end of Part 3, Robert Anderson had transformed from a private individual into a symbol of resistance and hope. His willingness to share his story had ignited a firestorm of activism, uniting people from all walks of life under a common cause. Though the battle against systemic racism was far from over, one thing was certain. Robert's voice had become a beacon guiding the way toward a brighter future. The public outcry over Officer Mark Harris's actions reached a fever pitch as more revelations about his past misconduct came to light. What had started as an isolated incident involving Captain Robert Anderson quickly evolved into a broader reckoning with systemic racism and police brutality. The pressure on local authorities to act was immense, with citizens demanding not just accountability for Harris but also meaningful reforms to prevent similar incidents in the future. As investigations into Harris's conduct intensified, documents detailing previous complaints against him were made public. These records painted a damning picture of an officer who had repeatedly crossed ethical boundaries without facing real consequences. One report revealed that Harris had been accused of using racial slurs during traffic stops multiple times, yet internal reviews had dismissed these claims as unsubstantiated. Another complaint highlighted how he had allegedly manhandled a teenager during a routine ID check, leaving bruises visible for days afterward. Despite these allegations, Harris had received little more than verbal warnings or brief suspensions, penalties, so minor they barely registered as punishment. The lack of accountability infuriated residents of Silver Ridge, many of whom felt betrayed by the very institution meant to protect them. Protesters gathered outside the police station daily, holding signs that read, "No justice, no peace," and chanting slogans like, "Fire Harris now." Activists led marches through the streets, drawing attention to the wider issue of systemic racism within law enforcement. Even children joined in, carrying handmade posters with messages like, "Stop hurting our families." Local politicians scrambled to respond to the growing unrest. The mayor of Silver Ridge held an emergency press conference, promising transparency and swift action. "We hear you," she declared, addressing the crowd of protesters. "This is unacceptable, and we are committed to ensuring justice is served." However, her words rang hollow to many, who pointed out that similar promises had been made and broken after previous incidents of police misconduct. Meanwhile, Captain Robert Anderson pursued legal action against Harris, filing charges for assault, misconduct, and violation of civil rights. His legal team argued that Harris's behavior during the traffic stop constituted criminal negligence and demonstrated clear bias based on race. They presented evidence from the viral video, witness testimonies, and Harris's disciplinary record to build a compelling case. The lawsuit garnered national attention, with prominent figures weighing in on the matter. Civil rights activists praised Robert for taking a stand, while military leaders expressed solidarity with their fellow veteran. Even celebrities used their platforms to amplify the message, urging fans to support the fight for justice. Donations poured in to help cover Robert's legal fees, and volunteers offered their time to organize rallies and spread awareness. Despite the overwhelming support, Harris and his defenders clung to their narrative, attempting to justify his actions. During early court proceedings, Harris's attorney argued that he had acted in self-defense, claiming he felt threatened by Robert despite having no reasonable cause. This defense baffled observers, given that Robert had remained calm and compliant throughout the encounter. Video footage clearly showed Harris escalating the situation unnecessarily, and witnesses corroborated Robert's account of events. As the legal battle unfolded, public sentiment shifted increasingly against Harris. Former colleagues began speaking out, revealing troubling details about his behavior behind closed doors. One officer described how Harris frequently mocked minority groups during roll calls, making crude jokes at their expense. Another recounted an incident where Harris had bragged about targeting specific neighborhoods because of their demographics. These testimonies painted a chilling portrait of an individual whose prejudices extended far beyond the night he confronted robber. The mounting evidence forced the police department to take decisive action. After weeks of internal review, an oversight board concluded that Harris's conduct during the traffic stop violated department policies and demonstrated gross misconduct. They recommended his immediate termination, a decision swiftly approved by the police chief. News of Harris's firing spread rapidly, sparking celebrations among protesters and supporters alike. For many, it felt like a hard-fought victory, a sign that accountability was finally within reach. However, Harris refused to go quietly. In a defiant move, he filed a lawsuit against the police department claiming wrongful dismissal. He accused his superiors of bowing to public pressure, rather than adhering to due process, insisting that he had been unfairly scapegoated. But his efforts failed to gain traction, as damning testimonies continued to surface. Fellow officers distanced themselves from him, fearing association with someone now widely regarded as a disgrace to the profession. While Harris fought to salvage his career, Robert focused on securing systemic change. He collaborated with lawmakers to draft legislation aimed at increasing accountability within law enforcement. Among the proposed measures were mandatory body cameras for all officers, stricter penalties for misconduct, and independent oversight committees to investigate complaints. Robert also advocated for diversity training programs designed to address implicit bias, emphasizing the need for cultural sensitivity among those tasked with protecting communities. His efforts gained significant momentum, thanks in part to widespread grassroots support. Community organizations played a crucial role in lobbying for reform, organizing town halls and educational workshops to engage citizens in the conversation. Students participated in walkouts and vigils, demanding safer neighborhoods and fairer treatment. Artists created murals celebrating resilience and unity, transforming walls across Silver Ridge into vibrant symbols of hope. Even businesses joined the movement, pledging financial support for initiatives promoting equality and justice. Local restaurants donated portions of their profits to advocacy groups, while retail stores displayed signs advocating for reform. The collective effort sent a powerful message. This wasn't just Robert's fight. It belonged to everyone invested in creating a better future. Despite the progress, challenges persisted. Critics argued that true reform required more than symbolic gestures. It demanded structural changes that addressed the root causes of inequality and injustice. Others warned that dismantling entrenched systems of oppression would be a long and difficult journey, one that required patience, persistence, and unwavering commitment. Through it all, Robert remained steadfast. Though the emotional toll of reliving the trauma weighed heavily on him, he drew strength from the community rallying around him. At a rally marking 6 months since the incident, he addressed the crowd with renewed determination. "We've come a long way," he said, his voice resonating with conviction. "But let's not forget why we're here. We're fighting for a world where no one has to fear being treated differently because of the color of their skin, where every child can grow up knowing they'll be judged by their character, not their appearance. That's the legacy I want to leave behind." As the sun set on the gathering, cheers erupted once again. People hugged each other tightly, tears streaming down their faces as they celebrated the progress made and prepared for the battle still ahead. Robert's story had become more than just a tale of survival. It was a testament to the power of courage, resilience, and collective action. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, one thing was clear. The people of Silver Ridge and beyond were ready to walk it together. The downfall of Officer Mark Harris unfolded like a storm that refused to subside. What started as an isolated incident involving Captain Robert Anderson quickly spiraled into a full-blown reckoning, exposing the cracks in a system many had long suspected was broken. As investigations deepened and public pressure mounted, Harris found himself at the center of a whirlwind he could no longer control. After being fired from the police department, Harris attempted to fight back, filing a lawsuit claiming wrongful termination. He argued that his dismissal was politically motivated and stemmed from public outrage rather than any legitimate misconduct on his part. His legal team presented arguments suggesting that Harris had simply been doing his job, a narrative that clashed sharply with the overwhelming evidence against him. Videos, witness testimonies, and records of past complaints painted a damning picture of an officer who had repeatedly abused his power without facing real consequences. Until now. Harris's attempts to defend himself only dug him deeper into controversy. During depositions and hearings, his demeanor came across as dismissive and unapologetic. When asked about the racial slurs witnesses claimed they heard him use during the traffic stop, Harris shrugged them off as misunderstandings. He insisted he felt threatened by Robert, despite having no reasonable justification for pulling out his gun or behaving so aggressively. These explanations did little to sway public opinion. Instead, they fueled further anger and disbelief. Former colleagues, once hesitant to speak out, began stepping forward with explosive revelations about Harris's behavior behind closed doors. One officer recounted how Harris openly mocked minority groups during briefings, using derogatory language and laughing at their expense. Another described how Harris bragged about targeting specific neighborhoods based on racial demographics, treating residents there as suspects before even interacting with them. These accounts shattered whatever shred of credibility Harris still clung to, leaving him increasingly isolated. As more details emerged, Harris's case crumbled under scrutiny. The judge overseeing his wrongful termination lawsuit ruled against him, citing the extensive documentation of his misconduct and the clear violation of department policies. Not only was his claim rejected, but he was also ordered to pay damages to Robert Anderson for emotional distress caused during the traffic stop. For Harris, this marked not just the end of his career, but also financial ruin. Legal fees and compensation. Payouts drained his savings, forcing him to sell his home and declare bankruptcy. Despite losing everything, Harris remained defiant. In interviews with sympathetic media outlets, he blamed cancel culture for his downfall, accusing activists and journalists of exaggerating the incident to push a political agenda. He portrayed himself as a victim of circumstance, claiming he was being punished for doing what he believed was right. But few were convinced by his arguments. Even within law enforcement circles where loyalty often ran deep, many distanced themselves from him, fearing association with someone whose actions had tarnished the profession's reputation. For Captain Robert Anderson, Harris's fall from grace was bittersweet. On one hand, it represented a victory, not just for him personally, but for everyone who had ever been mistreated by those sworn to protect them. Justice had been served, at least in part. On the other hand, Robert couldn't help but feel sadness for the wasted potential and harm caused by Harris's unchecked prejudice. A man entrusted with authority had chosen hatred over empathy, fear over fairness, and aggression over restraint. The consequences rippled far beyond the individuals involved, affecting entire communities. In the wake of Harris's firing and legal defeat, the police department faced intense scrutiny. Calls for reform grew louder, with citizens demanding accountability not just for individual officers, but for the systems that enabled misconduct to persist. Activists pushed for independent oversight boards to investigate complaints, ensuring transparency and impartiality in cases of alleged wrongdoing. They also advocated for stricter hiring standards, emphasizing the need for psychological evaluations and background checks to weed out candidates prone to bias or aggression. Lawmakers responded by introducing sweeping legislation aimed at addressing systemic issues within law enforcement. Mandatory body cameras became a requirement for all officers, with strict penalties for failing to activate them during interactions with the public. Training programs were revamped to include modules on implicit bias, cultural sensitivity, and conflict resolution. Additionally, disciplinary measures for misconduct were strengthened, making it harder for repeat offenders like Harris to evade consequences. These changes didn't happen overnight, nor were they universally embraced. Some officers resisted the reforms, arguing they created unnecessary burdens and undermined trust between law enforcement and the communities they served. Others expressed concerns about funding, pointing out that implementing new policies required resources many departments lacked. Despite these challenges, progress continued steadily, driven by relentless advocacy from grassroots organizations and leaders like Robert Anderson. Robert played a pivotal role in shaping these reforms, working closely with lawmakers, activists, and community members to ensure meaningful change. He testified before legislative committees, sharing his personal experience to highlight the urgent need for action. He attended town hall meetings, listening to residents' concerns and offering solutions grounded in both practicality and compassion, and he collaborated with educators to develop training materials designed to foster understanding and empathy among officers. One of the most impactful initiatives Robert championed was the creation of a mentorship program, pairing seasoned officers with recruits. The goal was simple yet profound: to instill values of integrity, respect, and service early in an officer's career. Veterans, teachers, and community leaders volunteered their time to guide young cadets, teaching them not just technical skills, but also the importance of building trust and fostering positive relationships with the people they served. The program proved transformative, earning praise from participants and observers alike. Recruits reported feeling better prepared to handle challenging situations with patience and professionalism. Experienced officers appreciated the opportunity to reflect on their own practices and share lessons learned over years of service. Most importantly, residents noticed a shift in the way police interacted with them: less confrontational, more collaborative. Though Harris's removal from the force marked a significant milestone, Robert understood that true justice extended beyond punishing one bad actor. It required dismantling the structures that allowed such behavior to thrive in the first place. That meant confronting uncomfortable truths about racism, inequality, and power dynamics head-on. It meant acknowledging past failures and committing to a future defined by accountability and equity. At a rally celebrating the passage of key reform bills, Robert addressed a sea of supporters, his voice steady, but filled with emotion. "This isn't the end," he said, scanning the crowd. "It's just the beginning. We've taken important steps toward creating a safer, fairer society, but our work is far from done. Change doesn't happen overnight. It takes courage, persistence, and unity." His words resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom nodded in agreement. They knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with obstacles. But they also knew they weren't alone. Together they had achieved something remarkable, and together they would continue pushing forward. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the gathering, cheers erupted once again. People hugged each other tightly, tears streaming down their faces as they celebrated the progress made and prepared for the battles still ahead. Robert's story had become more than just a tale of survival. It was a testament to the power of resilience, determination, and collective action. And though the journey was far from over, one thing was certain: the people of Silver Ridge, and beyond, were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, united in their pursuit of justice. The victory against Officer Mark Harris marked a turning point, but Captain Robert Anderson knew it was only the beginning of a much larger journey. The reforms sparked by his courage had ignited hope in communities across the nation, yet the deep-rooted issues of racism and police misconduct were far from resolved. For Robert, this wasn't just about punishing one individual. It was about creating lasting change that would protect future generations from enduring what he had faced. The months following Harris's dismissal and legal defeat, Silver Ridge became a symbol of resilience and determination. Activists, lawmakers, and ordinary citizens worked hand in hand to implement policies aimed at transforming law enforcement practices. Mandatory body cameras became standard for all officers, ensuring transparency during interactions with the public. Independent oversight boards were established to investigate complaints of misconduct, providing a layer of accountability that had long been missing. Training programs focused on cultural sensitivity and de-escalation techniques replaced outdated curricula, teaching officers how to approach situations with empathy rather than aggression. These changes weren't perfect, nor were they universally accepted. Some officers grumbled about feeling scrutinized or mistrusted, while others worried the new rules might hinder their ability to do their jobs effectively. But for many residents, especially those from marginalized communities, the reforms represented a step toward healing decades of mistrust. Slowly but surely, relationships between law enforcement and the people they served began to improve. Officers started attending community events, sitting down with residents over coffee to discuss concerns and build connections. It wasn't always easy, but small gestures like these helped bridge gaps that had once seemed insurmountable. Robert remained at the forefront of the movement, using his platform to advocate for systemic change, not just in Silver Ridge, but nationwide. He traveled to cities grappling with similar challenges, sharing his story and offering guidance based on lessons learned in his hometown. At conferences, he spoke passionately about the importance of collaboration between law enforcement and the communities they served. Reform isn't about pointing fingers, he often said. It's about working together to create a system that protects everyone equally. His efforts earned him widespread recognition. Awards and honors poured in, celebrating his bravery and leadership. Yet Robert never let the accolades go to his head. To him, the real reward was seeing tangible improvements in people's lives. When a young mother approached him after a speech, tears streaming down her face as she thanked him for giving her hope that her son wouldn't grow up fearing the police, Robert felt a surge of pride and renewed purpose. But even as progress unfolded, reminders of the work still needed persisted. In other parts of the country, reports of police brutality continued to surface, reigniting debates about accountability and justice. Each new case served as a sobering reminder that reform couldn't stop at local borders. It had to extend nationwide. Inspired by Robert's example, activists launched campaigns calling for federal legislation to address systemic racism within law enforcement. They pushed for national standards governing use of force policies, independent investigations into officer misconduct, and funding for community-based alternatives to traditional policing. Robert threw himself into these efforts wholeheartedly, collaborating with advocacy groups and lobbying lawmakers to support bold, sweeping reforms. His tireless dedication inspired others to join the fight, creating a ripple effect that reached corners of society previously untouched by activism. Students organized protests on college campuses, demanding universities divest from companies linked to discriminatory practices. Artists used their talents to amplify marginalized voices, painting murals and writing songs that captured the spirit of the movement. Even businesses pledged to hire more diversely and invest in underserved neighborhoods, recognizing their role in fostering equality. Through it all, Robert stayed grounded by focusing on the personal impact of his work. He visited schools, speaking to children about the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. He encouraged them to dream big and believe in their power to make a difference. "You don't have to wait until you're older to create change," he told a group of wide-eyed fifth graders during one visit. "Every act of kindness, every voice raised against injustice, it matters. Together, we can build a world where everyone feels safe and valued." His words resonated deeply with young listeners, planting seeds of hope and determination in their hearts. Many wrote letters thanking him for inspiring them, vowing to carry the torch of activism into adulthood. For Robert, knowing he was shaping the next generation gave him strength to keep pushing forward, even on days when the weight of the struggle felt overwhelming. At home, Robert leaned heavily on his family for support. Michelle and their children stood by him through every high and low, offering love and encouragement when the pressure threatened to overwhelm him. Though the ordeal had taken its toll, sleepless nights haunted by memories of the traffic stop, moments of doubt about whether his efforts were enough, Robert found solace in their unwavering belief in his mission. Their laughter reminded him of the life he was fighting to protect, fueling his resolve to keep going. By the one-year anniversary of the incident, Silver Ridge had transformed in remarkable ways. Crime rates had dropped, thanks in part to stronger community police partnerships. Residents reported feeling safer walking the streets at night, knowing officers were held accountable for their actions. Protests that once filled the town square had given way to festivals celebrating diversity and unity. drawing visitors from neighboring towns eager to witness the positive change firsthand. To commemorate the milestone, the city hosted a special event honoring those who had contributed to the transformation. Speakers included activists, lawmakers, and everyday citizens whose lives had been touched by the movement. When it was Robert's turn to take the stage, the crowd erupted in applause, standing in unison to show their respect and gratitude. Today, we celebrate how far we've come, Robert began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. But let's not forget why we're here. We're here because we refused to accept injustice, because we chose to stand together instead of staying silent, because we believed in a better future, and we worked tirelessly to make it a reality. Paused, scanning the sea of faces before him. This journey hasn't been easy. There have been setbacks, moments of doubt, and times when it felt like we were fighting an uphill battle. But look around you. Look at what we've accomplished. We've shown the world that change is possible, that when we unite, we can overcome even the greatest challenges. As the sun set over the gathering, casting a golden glow across the crowd, cheers erupted once again. People hugged each other tightly, tears streaming down their faces as they celebrated the progress made and prepared for the battles still ahead. Robert's story had become more than just a tale of survival. It was a testament to the power of courage, resilience, and collective action. And though the road to true justice was long and winding, one thing was certain: the people of Silver Ridge and beyond were ready to walk it together. In the end, Robert understood that the fight for equality and fairness would never truly be over. Systems built on inequality didn't crumble overnight, and prejudices ingrained over centuries wouldn't vanish without persistent effort. But he also knew that every step forward mattered. Every policy changed, every mind opened, every heart touched brought them closer to the world they envisioned. A world where no one had to fear being treated differently because of the color of their skin. As he stood there, surrounded by the community he had helped galvanize, Robert allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The scars of that fateful night would always remain, a reminder of the cost of speaking out. But so too would the victories, the reforms enacted, the lives touched, the hope reignited. And as long as there were people willing to stand up and demand better, Robert knew the future would shine brighter than the past.